You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and other senior members of the Trump administration briefed U.S. senators today, 3 days after the American military raid that captured Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. The operation was a sudden and intense escalation of an ongoing campaign to oust Maduro. He and his wife, Cilia Flores, appeared in a Manhattan court yesterday in an arraignment hearing over drug trafficking and weapons charges. Those charges were central to the Trump administration's rationale for capturing Maduro. But since Maduro's arrest, the Trump administration has focused more on the Venezuelan oil industry and threatened other countries in Latin America, including Cuba, Colombia, and Mexico. Here to talk about the foreign policy implications of all of this is Jenaro Abraham. He's an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Gonzaga University, where he studies social movements and insurgencies in Latin America. Jenaro, thank you very much for being here.
No, thank you for having me.
So Maduro was in court yesterday. He pled not guilty to terrorism charges. He made a point to say that he was kidnapped by the United States. What do you make of these charges and the case that the United States is building against the president of a sovereign nation?
Well, I think that the charges themselves, from the point of view of the Venezuelan people, or more particularly the people of Chavista orientation, that is the social movement that is behind, the political movement that is behind Nicolás Maduro, they see these charges as political theater. They see it as something that is aimed at kind of twisting the arm of Venezuela and what they call their Bolivarian revolution, that the United States, with hopes that they would get what they want out of Venezuela's natural resources, whether that be oil or whether that be things that are related to the arco minero, which is basically some mining initiatives that have been set up in Venezuela to try to diversify their economy after oil prices have dropped and oil production has dropped. From, I think, the point of view of the Trump administration and whatnot, they see these charges, I think, as an opportunity, quite frankly, to exploit the situation and probably get a favorable trade deal with Venezuela. There's talk about regime change. There's talk about this being used as leverage, the case itself. As given the fact that there's very little precedent behind charges such as narco terrorism, and because of it, it's very malleable. It's a situation where the court can go in various directions, and novel arguments will be made.
So as soon as Maduro was captured, we saw an escalation of the talk about oil, Venezuela's oil. A lot less talk about the drug trade, which is, again, underlining the actual charges against Maduro in New York right now. Much more about the idea that Delcy Rodriguez was going to have to work with the United States to open up the access to oil for more U.S. companies, not just Chevron. What do you make of this switch by the president to focus on oil in Venezuela?
Well, I think Trump has this way of kind of shaking up the status quo and seeing where the chips fall and then charting a path as he moves forward. I think he's done that with Venezuela, and then he's talked about regime change. He's talked about, changing things in Venezuela. But if he can get what he wants out of Venezuela, I think he would be willing to keep Delcy Rodriguez in power, because there is also recognition, even by Marco Rubio, even by the vice president of the United States, and by Trump himself in recent commentary, that most of the political opposition doesn't even live in Venezuela. They have left. They're part of that exodus, that they consider themselves, political migrants, right? People that are exiled from Venezuela. And because of it, you have a very loyal Chavismo, like a political force, Chavismo in Venezuela, that it's the most consolidated political movement in Venezuela. It's very hard. It would be very hard for regime change to occur in any meaningful way. And I think Trump and the State Department, for that matter, recognize that difficulty and preferred a pact with Chavismo. And I believe that they would prefer to simply get what they want and not even entertain the idea of what they consider democratization.
You say that the Chavismos have the most consolidated power, but, in the 2024 election, the outside observers say that opposition candidates won 2/3 of the votes, that Maria Machado on Fox yesterday was arguing that if she were to run or her party were to run in an election right now, they would win 90% of the vote. Why do you say that, I guess, the Chavismos are still the most coherent political power there?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think it's very difficult to see it from afar because that particular election, I think there's a lot of questions still surrounding like who actually won, what the numbers actually were. Not everything was public, right? So there's a lot of transparency issues. The fact that they were able to get behind Machado or Edmundo, which was that shadow candidate for the movement, is indicative of a very rare kind of moving of forces together for that particular moment. In general, the opposition is very divided in Venezuela. One of the reasons why Maduro has actually been able to win some elections fair and square, not necessarily that one, but it's because the Chavismo, despite their differences, when they have to come together, they do. The opposition, I believe, is much broader and much more diverse in a lot of senses. You have people of the what we'd consider the United States the far right, which was probably like a Machado figure, and you had at one time people that consider themselves democratic socialists. Like it's a very diverse range of people that it's hard to get them together to even support a candidate, let alone a political project for the future. So because of it, I mean, Chavismo controls all the institutions. It can mold it to its liking. And in reality, it is the, I guess, the residual effects of people before Chavismo that have long felt forgotten. These are the poorest of the poor that all of a sudden have some job or have some dignity, and that the Bolivarian Revolution, with all of its faults, gave them a sense of peoplehood, even if they have less money now, but they have dignity, right? And I think from the outside, it's kind of hard to measure those things. And because of it, I think it's also worth noting that when a foreign power comes in and abducts a president, a sitting president, regardless of whether that you consider it legitimate or not, it is riling people up. It is creating not necessarily a sense of martyrdom, but a sense of unfairness in how the United States is treating Venezuela, and it is lending legitimacy to the Chavistas. It's like, look, this is what the United States always wanted to do, regime change. When we're saying that they wanted to get involved in our political dealings, this is what they meant. They want to control Venezuela. Donald Trump isn't helping to counter that argument by saying that he's going to be in control of oil and control of Venezuela in some sort of transitory manner. These are things that are emboldening Chavismo, and I think it's going to make it very hard for the United States or any other power to even make any claims about democratization.
Do you think that the intervention by the United States will push Venezuela, maybe not Venezuela because of the leverage the United States now has over it, but other countries in Latin America towards alternatives like Russia or China?
I have no doubt in my mind that countries like Brazil, Colombia, Mexico are looking that way and trying to find solutions to, I guess, their political problems in the hemisphere that don't necessarily center the United States. This is obviously something very hard to achieve, given the fact that the United States, has a lot of coercive power. It once had a lot of soft power, but it is now, under the Trump administration, exercising all of its coercive power to get what it wants. It's something that in the short term can produce immediate results, but in the long term really undermines public trust in the United States, or trust in international circles, which I think ultimately will undermine the United States position in the international community.
The President Trump, after the capture of Maduro, in that exchange with reporters, he threatened the leader of Colombia. He threatened Gustavo Petro, reiterating comments that he had to watch his ass. That's a quote. He and Marco Rubio also brought up Cuba. Even Mexico has been brought up at this point in terms of countries that may have to watch for future U.S. intervention. I mean, What do you make of these threats and their effects in Latin America?
Well, it's certainly uniting some of the biggest countries in Latin America and the biggest leaders. It is creating this bifurcated Latin America where it's either you're with Trump or you're against him. I mean, we saw this with Javier Milei's election, for example, in Argentina, where Trump openly spoke of the economic benefits that Argentina would get if they elected Milei, right? I think this is part of his playbook. I think it's something that he will use in other countries. And I think this is what's happening in Venezuela. And I guess to your question, what has been, yeah, wielded against Claudia Sheinbaum, Gustavo Petro, Lula da Silva, is a part of that repertoire of the way he engages the international community. And it's also something that allows the United States to kind of not focus on the other wars or conflicts that are unpopular that it's involved in. Yeah, I think that it allows it to not talk too much about Ukraine, not talk about Syria, not talk about, what's happening in the Levant and Palestine. And it's an opportunity for Trump, for politics and Dodge the nation, to possibly win the midterm elections, or hopefully reserve some of the seats that they're trying to retain.
It's impossible to ignore the echoes with history when it comes to interventionism in Latin America. I mean, countries from Brazil to Chile, Guatemala, the interventions that the United States has engaged in, mostly by the CIA over the years, have tons of ripple effects in politics today. They created a lot of pain and misery in Latin America, and lasting effects in the politics of Latin America. There have been many people bringing up the regime change that the United States conducted in Panama in the late 80s with Manuel Noriega, who was captured and then brought in and stood trial. That was in 1990. He was also charged with drug crimes. What do you make of the comparisons between Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela and Noriega, the situation with Noriega?
I think in the political function of just going in and just taking a leader out of a sovereign nation, there is a big comparison to be made. I think the theatrics behind the cases, the one we saw with Noriega and the one that we're it's unfolding right now with Maduro, will have similar political functions. I think the big difference, though, is that there was clear evidence of Noriega actually participating in the drug trade. And quite frankly, there was also evidence that he was highly connected to the higher echelons of the CIA. When it comes to Maduro, there's little, if any, evidence that he would be connected to any of this. And because of it, I think that legal arguments are going to have to be made to possibly hold Maduro accountable to what they think are the crimes that he committed. That said, it's worth noting that the narco-terrorism scaffolding, the legal scaffolding that they're using to charge Maduro, it's one that is very specific, but not many people have been tried by this legal framework, and because of it, there's a lot of wiggle room to be able to create Nobel arguments, Nobel opinions, and for the courts themselves to mold these, I won't say unprecedented, but with these situations with little precedent, to the liking of the political actors that have more power. So this I believe, will be a highly politicized case, one that was much more politicized than the Noriega one, in that it is also against a president that is very unpopular in the United States and is very unpopular in the international community, and has burnt all of his bridges when it comes to the soft power that the United States once had. I believe that Noriega did not have that same kind of public, I guess, upheaval or anger against him being ousted by the United States. People, despite the lack of popularity that Maduro has in the United States, we're seeing this huge upheaval, people angry about what the United States is doing in Venezuela.
At the same time, it's difficult to make an argument to rally behind somebody like Maduro, who has created so much pain and really stolen from the Venezuelan people. I mean, can you just kind of leave us with a final thought on what the Venezuelan people have gone through over the last couple decades, under the Chavistas and the blockade by, the first Trump administration, the collapse of the economy, and now this. I mean, the Venezuelan people have been through much.
Yes, I think they've been through more than what we could possibly imagine. And I think, though, that there are many Venezuelas that will say different things about, what's really happening there. Certainly there's suffering. Certainly there is augmented poverty. Certainly this is a situation where 8 million Venezuelans had to leave Venezuela, most of them being economic migrants. Some of them consider themselves victims of political repression. I think that Venezuelans in Venezuela are very much divided on what to do or what to support. Most people do not want an intervention by the United States in Venezuela, but most people are fed up with the situation. Most people are fed up of having to depend on informal markets just to make ends meet and to make enough money day to day to eat. They're fed up of economic uncertainty. They're fed up with a lot of situations that they're having to endure. That said, I think there's a lot of blame that Venezuelans themselves spread around to who's at fault for that. So I think that what you'll hear from Venezuelans in the United States, much like the Cubans in the United States, they're usually there's an overrepresentation of a certain side of the political aisle, while there's an overrepresentation of Venezuela of another side of the political aisle. So we'll be hearing different things from different Venezuelans, right? That said, I think it's fair to say that Venezuelans want to change, and they want to be able to finally take control of their destiny, whatever that might be.
Jenaro Abraham is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Gonzaga University in Spokane. Thank you so much, Jenaro. I really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And you're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. When we come back from a quick break, Venezuelans around the world are still in shock over the sudden removal of Nicolás Maduro. We're going to hear from a Seattle area reporter and member of the Venezuelan diaspora about what she's watching and why she urges Americans to set aside typical right-left political frameworks to understand the current situation. That's coming up next year on KUOW. You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. While the story of U.S. intervention in Venezuela unfurls in New York, D.C., and on the global stage, members of the Venezuelan diaspora community in the Pacific Northwest have been watching what is happening with a complex mix of emotions. Marines Scaramaza is a reporter and manager of Latino Herald, which is based in Linwood. Marines, thank you very much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
So you are originally from Venezuela.
I am.
And you came to the United States in 2008. I'm curious, what was your initial reaction when you saw the news that the U.S. had staged this raid that captured Nicolás Maduro, the president of Venezuela, and brought him to the United States for trial? What was your reaction to that?
Well, that was a lot of reactions. At the beginning, when I started seeing the videos, it was like I was getting ready to go to bed, right? On a Saturday, like, oh, this is going to be a chill one. No, I was wrong. God. So I started seeing the videos and I was like, what is going on in Caracas? And then I started like getting confirmation. There is something happening here there is explosions and there is helicopters and all that. And when I hear there is military helicopters, I was like, oh, is this from Washington, D.C.? And then later that night, which I didn't sleep, and my family in Venezuela didn't sleep either. My sister in Miami didn't sleep much either. I think all of us didn't sleep so much. So we were waiting for some confirmation, right? And then President Trump said, we captured Maduro. And we were like, oh, wow, that was what was happening there. So it was a mix of emotions because when I came here, the country was heading towards a dictatorship. We saw it coming. In my case, I didn't run from it. I was just maybe thinking about it, but then I met my husband and we weren't teenagers, so 2 months later we decided, oh, what about if we get married? So that's how this started. It wasn't part of a big plan for me. And
you weren't leaving because Hugo Chavez was president at the time or anything?
I was thinking about it, kind of, because, the economical situation wasn't great. And also there was a lot of crime, like expanding. I was like, I have 2 kids. I am divorced. So how is this going to work in the long term for me, right? So I was thinking about it. And I came here for a vacation with my 2 daughters. And my husband said, let's get married. And I was like, my kids love you. Why not? Let's do it. And
let's go crazy.
Exactly. And here we are 18 years later.
Wow.
Happily married with a Mexican guy that has been living here for, I think, 3 decades.
Wow.
Great guy.
So what was it like then to see the country, as you say, devolve into a dictatorship from afar? When you were sitting here in the United States, but most of your family was still in Venezuela.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got to obligate myself to disconnect sometimes because it was so deeply frustrating and sad for me. I was like, I'm living here. I have to adapt to live here. So, but every time something came, like let's say Venezuela was on an election year, I was inside hoping for a change, right? But it never happened. We tried everything to go back to our democratic way of living, and it didn't work out. There was no way with them. So when I started seeing the bombs and the helicopters and Maduro being captured, I was happy for 5 minutes. 5 minutes because immediately my reporter side came and said, hold on, how is this going to work for the good of the people of Venezuela in the long term, right?
It felt good temporarily to see
well, of course, exactly.
Maduro go. But then you thought, what happens next?
Exactly. It's like, of course, he deserves to be in jail. He deserves to pay for what he has done. He has killed people. He's one of the most evil persons that I have ever seen running my country. And, my other country, because this one is mine too. But then I was like, we are looking for something that is good for our people to make them be living in freedom so they can have a dignified way of living. And I don't see that right now. It's like, okay, what's the plan? Because Delcy Rodriguez, which is the vice president, she's part of the same gang. I'm sorry, but I don't have any other way to call it.
The Chavistas, the
Chavistas,
people who were handpicked by
exactly.
Hugo Chavez to take over.
Uh-huh. So it's like they are just like, okay, now it's your turn in this chair. Or now it's my turn, because it's always the same people. It's Diosdado Cabello, it's Delcy Rodriguez, it's Jorge Rodriguez, which is the brother of Delcy, is Maduro, Cilia, and Padrino Lopez, all of them. So what is going to change? I don't see any changes in the near future. And I understand why a lot of people from Venezuela have hope, because, of course, you want to have hope. I do, too. But I don't see how that can be happening in the near future because Delcy is in power.
What are you hearing from your family and friends in Venezuela about what it's like in the streets or for daily life since the raid? Has anything changed?
Everybody is keeping themselves at home, pretty much. Well, my mom is retired right now, and she doesn't go out very often, but in general, she said the streets are very empty, and she doesn't live in Caracas. She lives in Maracaibo, which is the state that is very close to Colombia. But she said it's very quiet over here. It's like everybody is expecting something to happen really soon. So, for example, yesterday there was shots in front of Miraflores, the presidential palace. And everybody was like, oh, are they getting killed? I received a message from a friend. He lives here, and he said, is United States looking for killing them? And it was like, no, Sheil. They're not trying to kill anybody. It was apparently a confusion between them.
Between state police or
apparently it was
volunteer forces.
Drones, part of the government, and some of them security forces were like, they didn't know it was part of the government, and there was a confusion. That's the official story. Part of the story that they were saying.
But everybody's on edge, I would imagine. I mean, you hear shots and you think, what else is happening?
Exactly. If you hear, I don't know, your microwave, you'll get scared because you don't know what is going on, what's going to happen. There is no certainty that we are heading to something better.
Yeah. Let me ask you about the long-term prospects for stability and what's going to happen with the Venezuelan people, because the economy has already been tanking. There was a period of time when the Trump administration blockaded oil during the first administration, right? So when Trump was trying to get Maduro out just through economic sanctions, there was just a massive contraction of the economy. Now, the Trump administration, not only have they removed Maduro, but they're continuing that blockade. And basically, Chevron is able to take oil in and out, but nobody else right now. The government, from reporting, is storing oil. But if they can't export it, that's a huge drop in public revenue for public services. And so the expectation is the economy could collapse.
There is no public services in Venezuela right now. And it's been like that for years. For example, if you go to a hospital, there is a public hospital, they won't have aspirin. You have to buy it and bring it to the hospital. They don't have sheets. They don't have anything. They don't have scissors. So it's been like that forever. So the money that is going into the country from the oil, it was all for the government people.
Yeah.
It was all for them.
So it was already getting skimmed off the top. I mean, what are your fears about how much worse it could get if this blockade continues?
It cannot get any worse. Most of our people in Venezuela are living in an economy that it's not Bolivares, which was our the way you call our money. It's dollars. Everybody is selling and buying in dollars. So what is going to change? Nothing. For good, it can. For being worse, well, unless there is a earthquake or something like that. But from the economical part, like, the normal things that you buy or the value that your money has, it's the same because it's dollars.
Yeah. What does it feel like to be here right now at this moment and watching all of this unfold? I mean, what are your thoughts about the future and your hopes for your people? Because it feels at one point where there was a surge of a short-term hope about Maduro being out, but now the reality of the Delcy Rodriguez administration staying in, I mean, is there a sense of hopelessness? I hate to put words in your mouth. What are you feeling?
If you're talking to the person, I have this big hope inside me to see my country living in freedom and democracy again. How that can happen, I don't know, because I think we have to build the country from the ground, because every single institution has been corrupt. For example, if we are going to call for free elections, who's going to run those elections? Because the CNE, the Consejo Nacional Electoral, they are very corrupt. They are doing what the government is saying. And I understand why. There is a reason for that, of course. They are afraid. Yes, everybody who lives in Venezuela and speak out or do something that the government doesn't like is going to pay the consequences. So sometimes you you need to make tough choices, right? But it can happen. Of course, it can happen. Everything is possible. But I prefer not to have my hopes very high right now. I am just like watching things happen in the real time. So who knows? I just hope this administration, and I'm talking about Trump administration, has something planned that they haven't said. Because if they don't have a plan, then we are in a very bad situation right now.
Would you have preferred if the president, instead of getting up there in front of reporters on Saturday and saying that Delcy Rodriguez was somebody they could work with and that they had decided that, she was going to do what the United States said, so she was going to stay in power, would you have preferred to hear that Maria Corina Machado. Yeah, Machado was in power, the opposition leader who is in exile at this point? She's left to accept the Nobel Peace Prize. She had to sneak out of the country in a very dramatic fashion. I know she's been trying to make that case unsuccessfully, apparently, to the Trump administration. Would you have preferred to see Machado or her allies installed?
That will be if we live in Disneyland.
Disneyland.
Yeah. Why? That's simple. As I said, the Chavez-Maduro regime is everywhere. And I'm talking about colectivos. Like there is people that are being used to harm the population. So I don't think a transition in peace can happen saying, okay, we're going to take all these people out and then we're going to put Maria Corina Machado and all his team there, like suddenly. I think there is a transition that it needs to be happen. I'm not a politician. I am just a Venezuelan and a reporter. So I would prefer, of course, Maria Corina Machado to be in power, or Edmundo González, which is the person that was the owner of that chair.
He won the election.
He won the election
in 2024. He was kind of running in the place of Machado because she was not allowed to run.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So, but you're saying the CNE, which is the electoral division in Venezuela, it's corrupt. So, yeah, I think we need to call to new elections. And if we are calling to new elections, how? Who is going to be in charge to make sure those elections are transparent? So that's why I said we need to build the country from the ground. And I think that's the toughest part of all this. I cannot understand why they are deciding to kind of do a transition with Delcy, but that doesn't mean I like it. It's a mix of emotions that are very difficult to explain.
Because this is the person who was there overseeing much of the stealing from the Venezuelan people, the disappearances, the jailing of opposition, the silencing of free speech, all of this. This is somebody who's been right there and a participant. So it must be very hard to accept that transition is being orchestrated by the same people.
Exactly. And it's her brother. Also, her father was part of a kidnapping back in the days in Venezuela. So, yeah, it's a tough one for us right now. It's, as I said, there is a lot of gray. And 90% of our situation is gray right now. It's not black and white. It's gray. And we can oppose something that Trump says, but we can also agree with some things that he's saying. Like,
what do you agree with Trump about? I'm curious because I think the left in the United States, the Democrats, not universally, but most Democrats, but especially progressives in the United States, looked at the raid on Maduro and they are focused more on the fact that it likely is illegal under the UN Charter and it is illegal under international law. there wasn't a notification for Congress. There are many ways in which the argument can be made that this was an illegal act. Now, do you think that that makes this a bad move by the United States? Are you upset that the United States did take out Maduro in this manner?
No.
And I think that would surprise a lot of people as a Venezuelan.
I've been on a Democrat side most of my life, even here. So right now, we are living in a polarized, very polarized country, and I'm talking about United States. With the Venezuelan issue, I think my suggestion is to sit in the front, in another corner, to look at the issue outside yourself, right?
And outside
looking
the valences.
From afar. Looking from afar.
Just to say, so outside the valences of politics in the United States,
correct,
if that makes sense.
Correct,
right and
correct,
left politics in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Taking Maduro out of the country, there was no other way. Period. There was no other way. I understand about all the implications this can have inside our country, and I'm talking about United States. And I also can understand the fear some other countries can have, because President Trump said, oh, watch out, Colombia, watch out, Mexico, watch out, here and there. And I was like, oh, you're going too far, honey. Right? Because nobody wants to see that in their country, right? Me, talking as a Venezuelan, we tried everything. We went to United Nations every single time we could. We went to the street. We did everything we could democratically. We tried everything. It's been 27 years of this.
So doing things the lawful way, following international institutions, talking to, people who observed elections and said this was an illegally stolen election, like none of it was working.
No, Cuba. Yeah. So sadly, sometimes you have to take the road that you are avoiding for so long. And you have to try and try and try and try and try until you need a spanking. And I'm saying that as a Venezuelan. But also, I love democracy and I love the institutions, and I always want to find a solution that doesn't need to reach out for the weapons. But how much can a country take? There is a lot of people they don't have their loved ones. Part of my family is dead, and I haven't seen them in 18 years. Why? Because I don't want to go back. I am a U.S. citizen. What are they going to try to do with me? And I'm also a journalist. So
there's 2 strikes against you for that administration.
Exactly.
Yeah, that regime.
Mm-hmm. So it's very gray. Sadly, it's very gray. I hope this turns out to be a good decision from Trump's administration. Point for him and his administration, Marco Rubio. If not, I think there is a lot of people that are going to say, well, thank you. Anyway.
I do think that's such an important point to make, and lesson for us here in the United States is to get outside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. Don't put our frameworks onto what's happening in another country, and listen to the people who are actually affected. So Marina Scaramaza, reporter and manager of Latino Herald, the news outlet that is based in Linwood, Spanish language news outlet. I really appreciate your time today and this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing, and I hope we can continue talking as what's going on in Venezuela continues to unfold.
Of course. Thank you for having me and for being a voice for our people.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.